My daughter has been legally deceased for 6 months. Your Honor. Hearing my father say those words in court chilled my soul. I'm Luna Croft, 32, standing alive while my family fought to keep me dead. When my sister screamed, "She's just a homeless veteran," I stepped forward with one document that changed everything. The key still turned smoothly in the lock, a familiar click that should have heralded comfort but instead opened the door to a nightmare. After 6 months spent documenting catastrophic flood damage in remote Guatemalan villages, I expected to return to the cozy apartment I'd called home for 8 years. I anticipated the musty smell of a space left closed for too long, maybe some dust on the furniture, perhaps even a plant or two that hadn't survived my absence. I did not expect the chilling, hollow emptiness that greeted me. My suitcase dropped from my numb fingers, thudding on the bare floorboards. The sound echoed through spaces that should have been filled with my life. The bookshelves I'd painstakingly filled with historical texts and personal journals stood naked. The vibrant rug from Morocco, a gift from my grandmother, was gone. The walls, once adorned with photographs of my travels and my family, were stark and blank, showing only faint shadows where frames had once hung. I walked slowly into the living room, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the void. The kitchen countertops were clear. The cabinet stood open and empty, and even the refrigerator had been unplugged, its door ajar, smelling faintly of bleach and abandonment. "My things," I whispered into the silence, my voice trembling with a confusion that was rapidly curdling into dread. "Where is everything?" My first frantic call was to my sister, Sienna. It went straight to a generic voicemail greeting. Next, with trembling fingers, I dialed my father, Arthur Croft. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice infuriatingly calm and measured. "Luna, you're back." "Father, my apartment. It's been emptied," I stammered, my professional composure as a forensic archivist crumbling. "All my possessions, my work documents, everything is just gone." "The property was cleared as part of the estate process," he interrupted, his tone that of a corporate lawyer stating an unassailable fact, a tone I'd heard him use to dismantle opposition in boardrooms. Estate process? The words felt foreign and dangerous on my tongue. What does that mean? What are you talking about? A pause stretched across the line, heavy with implication. "Luna, the court declared you deceased 6 months ago. After all communications stopped following the second major flood in the region, we were forced to assume the worst." I slid down the bare wall, my knees buckling beneath me, the cold hardwood pressing through my jeans. "Declared me dead?" The words were a choked whisper. "But I'm here. I'm alive!" I was saving historical records and community archives from water damage. "Your humanitarian work was always noble," he said, and I could hear the careful distance, the subtle dismissal in his voice. "But the legal process has moved forward. We have a hearing tomorrow to finalize matters. I suggest you make other arrangements for the night." The call ended, leaving me sitting in the darkening emptiness of what was no longer my home. At 32 years old, I was a ghost in my own life, a legal fiction whose existence had been neatly and efficiently erased. The next morning, a visit to my bank confirmed the nightmare. The teller's polite smile froze and then vanished as she typed my information into her computer. "I'm sorry, Ms. Croft, but all these accounts have been frozen under a court order." "I'm standing right here," I insisted, my voice rising as I pushed my passport and driver's license across the cool marble counter. "Look at me. I'm alive." The manager was summoned. Documents were examined with furrowed brows, but the result was the same. The legal declaration of death was a wall I couldn't breach, no matter how alive I felt, no matter how my heart pounded in my chest. The system had accepted a piece of paper over my tangible, breathing reality. With the last of the physical cash I'd returned with, I bought a bitter coffee at a corner cafe and, with a deep breath, scrolled through my contacts to find Jian Wei, a sharp probate attorney I'd met at a legal archives conference years ago. "Jian, it's Luna Croft," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need help proving I'm alive." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. "Luna? But your father—" "He filed the death certificate months ago. The estate's been in probate. I was in a communications blackout zone after the secondary floods hit. They declared me dead while I was preserving the only surviving land records for an entire village." Another pause, shorter this time, filled with the clicking of a keyboard. "Meet me at my office in 1 hour," he said, his tone now all business. "And Luna? Bring every piece of identification you have. Everything." Walking to his office through the bustling city streets, The world felt alien and distorted. People rushed past, their lives intact, their identities secure, while mine had been legally invalidated. But beneath the shock and the gut-wrenching betrayal, the core of my training as a forensic archivist began to stir. Documents could be forged, signatures could be mimicked, paper trails could be meticulously fabricated to tell any story one wanted to tell. My family, it seemed, had started a paper war with an expert in authentication, and as I pushed open the door to Jan's building, I knew I was just beginning to learn how to fight back. Jean's office was a sanctuary of ordered chaos, a stark contrast to the disarray of my life. The air smelled of old, well-kept books and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee, scents that were familiar and comforting in my newly unfamiliar world. He was a man in his late 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a demeanor that radiated calm competence. He studied the collection of documents I spread across his expansive mahogany desk. My passport with its entry stamps, my driver's license, my professional accreditation as a forensic document analyst. They did this properly, he murmured after several minutes, tapping a finger on the copy of the death certificate he had pulled from the court records. Too properly. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. What does that mean, too properly? It means every I is dotted, every T is crossed with legal precision. The timing is perfect, filed, precisely when the second flood made external communication from your region impossible. The affidavit from your father, the supporting statement from your sister about your state of mind before you left. It's a masterclass in building a plausible narrative. He looked up at me, his expression grim. The evidence of your demise is almost flawless. My state of mind? I repeated, the implication sinking in. They used my dedication to the mission against me? They painted me as unstable? Worse, Jean said, turning his monitor to show me a complex spreadsheet of property records. They've already begun transferring assets from your grandmother's inheritance trust into a newly formed holding company called Ethelred Holdings. The listed directors are your father, Arthur Croft, and your sister, Sienna Croft. The numbers on the screen made me dizzy. The trust fund my grandmother had left specifically to me, the proceeds from the sale of her house, the small but valuable portfolio of stocks. It was all being systematically funneled away. They didn't just declare me dead, I whispered, horror washing over me. They're stealing everything. Legally speaking, from a deceased person, it's not theft. It's a state execution. Jean leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. Our immediate task is twofold. First, we must prove you are very much alive. Second, and more critically for criminal charges, we need evidence that they knew or strongly suspected you were alive when they filed this death certificate. How do we do that? I asked, my mind racing, trying to apply my archival skills to this personal crisis. Witnesses. Contemporaneous documents from Guatemala that prove you were alive and functioning, well after their declared date of death, anything. Then I remembered. The village elders, they were insistent on documenting our preservation, work for their own community records. There are time-stamped digital photographs, signed community letters of thanks. I have emails. Get them, Jan said urgently. Now, the hearing to finalize the estate distribution is tomorrow afternoon. If the judge rules in their favor and the assets are fully dispersed, untangling this and getting your life back could take years. I spent the next 2 hours in a cramped cyber cafe, sending frantic emails to my contacts in the Guatemalan village, begging for any time-stamped records from the critical period. The 6-hour time difference meant agonizing waiting, each minute stretching into an eternity of anxiety. As dusk began to settle over the city, painting the buildings in hues of orange and gray, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Miss Luna? The voice was rough but familiar. It's Kaylin. My breath hitched. Kaylin Jones was a homeless veteran. I'd helped navigate the VA system and find temporary shelter before. I left for my trip. I'd bought him a meal, listened to his story, and connected him with a local support charity. Kaylin, how did you get this number? Your father's men came around the shelter a few weeks back, asking about you, he said, his voice low. Said you were missing. I didn't like their questions. Didn't like their vibe. A new layer of ice formed in my veins. What kind of questions, Kaylin? About your mental state. If you seemed distracted, unstable before you left. If you talked about not wanting to come back. He paused, and I could hear the distaste in his silence. They offered me money. A lot of it. To say that you'd talked about disappearing. I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the cafe window. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, it was almost breathtaking. Thank you for telling me this, Kaylin. Thank you for not taking their money. Miss Luna. He hesitated. I saw something else. Maybe 2 weeks ago. Your father and your sister having dinner at that real fancy place downtown, the one with the glass walls. They were celebrating, laughing, toasting with champagne. I was outside, asking folks for spare change. Your father came out for a smoke, saw me, threw a $20 bill at my feet and said, "The dead should stay buried." I thought he was just being a cruel rich man. Now I think I understand. A witness. They hadn't just filed paperwork. They had celebrated my death while I was still breathing, while I was hauling mud-soaked documents from collapsed community halls. At that exact moment, my laptop pinged. Email responses from Guatemala began loading into my inbox one after another. Attachments downloaded, photographs of me, covered in dirt, smiling with villagers, with digital timestamps clearly showing dates weeks after my declared death. Scanned copies of signed community affidavits, on official village letterhead, thanking me for my work during that very period. I had my evidence. The paper trail was forming. But as I looked from the hopeful photos on my screen to the darkening city outside, I was gripped by a terrifying thought. In a court of law, against my father's resources and reputation, would it be enough? The following morning, the courthouse hallway was a cavern of echoing footsteps and low, anxious murmurs. I stood beside Jian, my hands clenched, the manila folder in my briefcase, feeling like it contained the weight of my entire existence. He adjusted his tie, his face a mask of professional calm, but I could see the tension around his eyes. "Remember the strategy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The initial burden is on us. We must prove convincingly and immediately not only that you are alive, which should be simple but isn't, but that their filing was made in bad faith. We need to plant the seed of fraud in the judge's mind from the very beginning." The massive wooden doors to the courtroom swung open with a low groan. Inside, the air was cool and still, smelling of old wood and lemon-scented polish. My father and sister were already seated at the defendant's table, their postures the picture of composed grief. My father, in his impeccably tailored charcoal suit, stared straight ahead at the judge's empty bench, refusing to even glance in my direction. Sienna, dressed in a conservative black dress, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, a performance of mourning that made my stomach turn. The hearing began with dry formalities. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing, reviewed the initial petition. Then my father took the stand. Under the soft lighting, he looked every bit the grieving patriarch. "We suffered a parent's worst nightmare when Luna disappeared," he said, his voice thick with a grief that sounded so real, so palpable that for a horrifying second, I almost believed it. The not knowing was a special kind of torture. "But we've had to accept our loss. All we want now is closure. Your Honor, the chance to lay our daughter's memory to rest and settle her affairs with dignity." My nails dug into my palms. The sheer audacity of the performance was staggering. Then it was our turn. I took the stand, my knees feeling weak. I presented my passport, pointing out the entry stamp that proved my return. I presented the printed emails and time-stamped photographs from Guatemala. The judge examined them carefully, her expression giving nothing away. It was during my cross-examination by my father's lawyer that things derailed. The lawyer, a slick man with a condescending smile, began insinuating that my trip was a symptom of instability. "Is it true, Ms. Croft, that you abandoned a promising career here to go play hero in a disaster zone?" he asked, his tone dripping with mock concern. "Objection," Sheen said, rising to his feet. "Argumentative and irrelevant." The judge waved him down. "I'll allow it. The petitioner's state of mind prior to her alleged disappearance is relevant. Answer the question." Before I could form a response, Sienna suddenly stood up at her table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Your Honor, may I speak? It's so hard to see her like this." She turned her tear-filled eyes toward the bench. "My sister has always been unstable. Her obsession with helping strangers instead of her own family. She was always running away from us. Then this homeless man she's become obsessed with." "That's not true!" The words burst from me, loud and sharp in the quiet room. The composure I'd worked so hard to maintain shattered. The judge's gavel cracked down, the sound like a gunshot. "I will have order in my courtroom," One more outburst, Miss Croft, and I will have you removed. I sank back into my seat, my face burning with humiliation and fury. Jean shot me a warning look. This was exactly what they wanted, to paint me as emotional, unhinged. It was at that moment, as I struggled to regain my breath, that a figure stood up from the very back row of the public gallery. Kalen Jones. He had come. He was clean-shaven, wearing a simple but clean button-down shirt and trousers, his military bearing unmistakable despite the years of hardship. He held a plain white envelope in his hand. My sister, seeing him, pointed a dramatic, trembling finger. "Your Honor, that's him!" "That's the homeless veteran she's always dragging around." "She's just a homeless veteran." "She's nobody!" The words, "she's just a homeless veteran," tore through the courtroom, vicious and sharp, meant to discredit and dismiss. The cruelty of it stole the air from my lungs. But Kalen didn't flinch. He walked calmly down the center aisle, his posture straight, his gaze fixed on the judge. He stopped before the bench and placed the envelope on the clerk's desk. "Former Sergeant Kalen Jones, United States Army, Your Honor," he said, his voice clear and steady, carrying through the silent room. "And I have evidence that Mr. Arthur Croft knew his daughter was alive, and well, when he filed that death certificate." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. My father's head snapped around, his eyes wide with a flash of pure, unadulterated panic. For the first time, I saw the mask slip completely. The envelope contained a credit card receipt from the upscale restaurant, clearly showing my father's name. The date, which was the day after he had filed the death certificate, and a bottle of Dom, Perignon Champagne. Alongside it was a sworn and notarized affidavit from the restaurant's maître d', confirming that Arthur and Sienna Croft had been in a celebratory mood that evening, toasting repeatedly. But as the judge examined these new pieces of evidence, her brow furrowed. Gian was already rising, holding another thicker file. The restaurant receipt was just the trigger. The true weapon, the one that would turn a family dispute into a criminal proceeding, was yet to be unveiled. A profound electric hush fell over the courtroom as the judge finished, reading the restaurant receipt and the accompanying affidavit. She looked from the papers to my father's ashen face, then to Kalen's steady gaze, and finally to me. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. "My father celebrated my death?" The words left my lips in a horrified whisper, barely audible, yet they seemed to hang in the stunned silence. "Worse," Jean murmured to me, his voice low and tense as he pulled a new, thicker set of documents from his sleek leather briefcase. "While you were gathering your evidence in Guatemala, I had a hunch. I subpoenaed their recent financials and cross-referenced them with the probate filings." He laid a single sheet of paper on the table before us. It was a bank transfer record. My eyes scanned the lines, the numbers blurring before the horrifying reality snapped into focus. 2 days, I breathed, my blood running cold. 2 days after declaring me dead, he initiated a transfer from my trust fund, $1 million, to a numbered account in the Cayman Islands. The numbers on the page were no longer abstract figures. They were the price tag my father had placed on my life. "They didn't just want me gone," I said, the realization a bitter pill. "They wanted everything I had, and they wanted it immediately. They couldn't even wait for the legal formalities to be complete." "There's more." Jan's voice dropped to a near whisper, forcing me to lean in. "The holding company, Ethelred Holdings, that they transferred your assets into? I ran it through a global registry. It's been used before. It took some digging, but I found a pattern. I spoke to your grandmother's former live-in nurse off the record. She mentioned there had been suspicious paperwork and a great deal of stress surrounding the amendment of your grandmother's will in the months before she passed. A horrific pattern began to emerge from the labyrinth of legal documents and financial records. My father's perfectly precise handwriting on every signature line, my sister's notarization stamp on every transfer. This wasn't a panic-induced, opportunistic grab after a presumed tragedy. The timing, the precision, the pre-existing corporate structures. This was a blueprint. This was a practiced routine. "They've done this before," I said aloud, the words tasting like poison. "The legal precision, the timing, the use of Ethelred. This isn't their first time. It's their specialty." Yang gave a grim, slow nod. "It's a pattern, Luna. We need to prove it, and we need to do it now." The hearing reconvenes in 1 hour. We have a lunch recess to gather our final blow. In the frantic 60 minutes that followed, I became a whirlwind of focused energy. I accessed my professional archival databases and secure cloud servers, remotely from Jian's office. As a forensic document specialist with top-level clearances for historical authentication, I had resources and cross-referencing tools that few outside my field knew existed. I searched for the name Ethelred Holdings, my father's law firm, Croft and Associates, and the specific notary number from my sister's stamp. And there it was, buried in digitized court records from 3 different states. The same pattern, repeating like a sinister melody. Ethelred Holdings appeared as a beneficiary in 2 other disputed inheritance cases where the primary heir had died under sudden or ambiguous circumstances. The same notary stamp was on questionable documents in a case in Florida where an elderly widow's estate was swiftly moved before her children could contest a new will. All tenuous connections on their own, but together, they formed a damning tapestry of systematic fraud, all leading back to my father's law firm as a common thread. They hadn't just targeted me. They had perfected this. I was not their first victim. I was simply the most recent and the most personally connected. When we returned to the tense silence of the courtroom, I carried a single, concise sheet of paper, a summarized chart I had compiled, linking the cases, the companies, and the notary stamps, a clear map of a pattern of predatory behavior that went far beyond my personal nightmare. My father's carefully constructed calm finally shattered when he saw that single page in my hand. His eyes widened, and a muscle in his jaw began to twitch. "Your Honor, this is harassment," he blustered, rising to his feet, his voice losing its polished cadence. "My daughter is clearly unstable, and now she is fabricating wild conspiracy theories to—" "The only thing unstable here," I interrupted, my voice clear, cold, and steady as I walked toward the judge's bench, "is your moral compass." I held his gaze for a long, charged moment before turning to the judge. "Your Honor, this document summarizes evidence of a pattern of fraudulent inheritance claims spanning the last decade, all connected to my father's firm. This isn't about one death certificate. This is about a system of predation." I placed the single, damning page on the polished wood of the judge's bench. The paper seemed to glow with accusatory power. For the first time, real, raw fear showed in my father's eyes. It wasn't the fear of losing a case. It was the fear of a house of cards, meticulously built over years, beginning its inevitable collapse. The judge picked up the single sheet of paper. The rustle of the page was the only sound in the utterly silent, packed courtroom. She read slowly, her eyes moving methodically down the chart I had created. With each passing second, her expression darkened, transforming from neutral assessment to grim understanding, and finally, to cold, simmering anger. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with the static of impending judgment. My father stood, his lawyer's composure completely gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a cornered animal. "Your Honor, I must object in the strongest possible terms. This is a character assassination. These so-called connections are circumstantial at best, fabricated at worst. My daughter is clearly—" "Silence, Mr. Croft." The judge's voice was low, but it cut through his panic like a whip. She looked from the document to me, then back to my father, her gaze boring into him. "This court has been presented with what appears to be compelling evidence of a pattern, evidence of systematic fraud that extends far beyond the tragic circumstances of this single case." My sister began to cry, not the performative sobs from earlier, but real, ragged, terrified tears. We were scared of being left with nothing," she whimpered, clutching the table for support. "Scared people, Ms. Croft, do not typically open numbered offshore accounts within 48 hours of a family member's alleged death," the judge stated, her voice dripping with icy contempt. She turned to the bailiff stationed by the door. "Lock these doors. No one leaves this room." The sharp, definitive click of the heavy lock engaging echoed, with the finality of a tomb sealing shut. My father sank back into his chair, all the fight draining out of him, his face a ghastly shade of gray. My sister's weeping was the only sound breaking the tense hush. A side door opened, and 2 uniformed police officers, along with a detective in a plain suit, entered the courtroom. The judge handed my document to the detective. "There is more than enough here for a multi-jurisdictional investigation. I am referring this matter for immediate criminal investigation. Potential charges include fraud, perjury, forgery, and likely conspiracy to commit same." As the officers approached my father, the full, staggering weight of the moment settled over me. This was no longer a victory. It was a reckoning. I hadn't just won back my life and my identity. I had potentially exposed a pattern of destruction that had victimized. Who knew how many others? The meticulous work of a forensic archivist, the skill of connecting disparate dots, had unraveled a scheme years in the making. My father looked at me as they guided his hands behind his back to apply the handcuffs. The metallic click was sickeningly loud, his eyes filled with a complex storm of hatred, humiliation, and a shred of something that might have been respect, locked with mine. "You were always too clever for your own good. Luna," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "No, father," I replied, my own voice steady, devoid of the anger I expected to feel, filled instead with a profound, weary sadness. "I was always too clever for yours." In the aftermath, as the courtroom slowly emptied, and the complex machinery of the justice system began to grind forward, Jean laid a steadying hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Luna. It took incredible courage." "I know," I said, and for the first time, the words felt completely, unshakably true. This had never been about the money, the property, or even the inheritance. It was about truth, the very principle that formed the bedrock of my profession and my personal creed. They had tried to bury the truth under a mountain of lies, and I had excavated it. Kalen waited for me outside in the corridor, the fluorescent lights glinting off his short-cropped hair. "You okay, Miss Luna?" he asked, his voice gentle. I looked at the man my family had so casually dismissed as just a homeless veteran, the man whose integrity and courage had helped bring their entire corrupt empire crashing down. "I am now, Kalen. I truly am. Thank you. I can never repay you." He offered a small, dignified smile. "No repayment needed, ma'am. Truth always wins out, eventually. It was an honor to help it along." In the weeks and months that followed, the full, horrifying scope of my father's operations began to emerge. News reports detailed the investigation. Several other families, seeing the headlines, came forward with similar stories of suspicious inheritances and sudden, unfavorable will changes connected to my father's law firm. The single document I had placed on the judge's bench had opened the floodgates, unleashing a torrent of truth that would keep investigators busy for years. I got my life back. My apartment was restored. My accounts were unfrozen. My name was legally, unequivocally declared alive. But I had gained something far more valuable than any of that. The unshakable certainty that some principles are worth fighting for, no matter the personal cost, and that standing up for what is right is its own reward. My family taught me a brutal but invaluable lesson: that paper can be manipulated, words can be twisted, and signatures can be forged, but truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, endures. And sometimes, the people society chooses to overlook hold the most powerful keys to justice.